الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We begin by praising Allah, we praise Him, we seek His help and we ask for His forgiveness. And we take refuge with Allah from the evil of ourselves and from the evil consequence of our evil actions. Whomsoever God guides, no one can misguide, but whomsoever God leaves to go astray, no one can guide. And I testify that God alone is worthy of worship and that Muhammad is His servant and His messenger. I am not in any way, shape or form a fan of personally participating in debates. Debates have their place. However, debates to me are a little bit like boxing matches. And usually when debates take place, you have the Christian in the right hand, or maybe on the left hand, whatever, and you have the Muslim in the other corner, and it's like, okay, ready, set, go, And I know Muslims often take almost a delight in vigorous speakers battering Christians with various things, but I really personally don't like participating in that type of. So if anyone came here today hoping that I was going to give Richard a good battering, it's not going to happen. I came here within the spirit of what I understand as a dialogue. And I believe a dialogue has a different set of etiquettes and manners from a debate. I don't mind dialogues, I think they're constructive. Debates usually only serve to entrench people in their own respective positions. So what I want to talk about under this topic today of faith and unity is something that I believe is common to our faiths. Something that I believe is common to Christianity and to Islam. And I think it's ground upon which Muslims and Christians can and should work together. And I believe it has its precedent in the Quran and in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. And so I'd like to begin by justifying my position from the texts, or from, I suppose we could say, from the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him. So most of us who are Muslim will be familiar with the reference in the Quran to Ahl al-Kitab. The term Ahl al-Kitab means the people of the book. And the people of the book, usually, most scholars agree, it's referring to Jews and to Christians. Actually, it's interesting that through a process of analogy, many Muslim scholars also said that the status of the Ahl al-Kitab applies to any religious tradition that has a book. Now, I tend to be a person who, for better or for worse, thinks about things quite deeply. I'm not one of those people who is always really content just to accept something and that's the way it is. I want to understand why. And I've thought a lot about why did Allah give the Ahl al-Kitab a status that He didn't give to anybody else. Now I don't hold the position, and I don't agree, that Christians and Jews that they have the same faith as us. I do believe that Judaism is essentially monotheistic, and I believe that Christianity is a sort of, I don't want to really go into it, but it's a sort of mixture of monotheism. Of course, as Muslims, we can't accept that it is purely monotheistic, since Christians generally believe that Jesus is God. And that fundamentally contradicts everything a Muslim believes about God. And here is my point. Shirk is considered to be, or making partners or making rivals with God, is considered to be, in the Quran, through the teachings of the Prophet, the most serious crime a human being can ever commit in the sight of God. And therefore to claim that Jesus is God, or to claim in any literal sense that people are the sons of God, and maybe in a symbolic sense there's room, but in a literal sense that someone might be the son of God, then that would be considered to be shirk. So why then, this is my question, why has the Quran afforded a very special status to the people of the book, to the Jews and the Christians? Well, specifically in this case perhaps to the Christians, since from our perspective, clearly from a Quranic perspective, this belief contains something which is so serious, which is shirk. And I think the secret here comes to understanding something about faith, about what God wants from human beings, and that ultimately human beings have to make a choice themselves about which path they follow and which belief they hold onto. And there is that famous statement in the Quran, La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. But as I would really, and what I believe is important to point out, and perhaps controversially today, is that religion, that Islam, rather like Judaism, is not just religion. It is not just religion. Islam is religion and law. It is religion and law. And it's very similar to Judaism in this sense, traditional Judaism. It is not only how do we pray to God, how do we fast, how do we give charity, what are the noble characteristics, the noble character that a human being should try to adopt, but it is also law. The Quran defines the laws through which and by which human beings should live. And this is the very important component, that component of law. And it is very interesting that although perhaps today one looks to the West and thinks of the West as being a land where religious tolerance is practiced, in spite of Richard's seniority to me in age, not much, but maybe a little bit, you know. And certainly, in terms of Christianity has been around longer than Islam. But I would say that Islam has seniority on the level of practicing tolerance amongst faiths. I think historically, the idea of tolerating other faiths is quite a new one in the Christian world, especially in the Western Christian world. And certainly within British and French and German society, well, it wasn't until very recently that Christians were pretty intolerant of each other. In fact, if you look to the causes of why secularism is so strong in France, it comes back to the religious wars between Protestants and Catholics. So this idea of religious tolerance, of course, however, is something that is enshrined in the Quran and in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, especially in regard to the Ahl al-Kitab. So it comes back to why. I'm thinking, why is that? Now, there are, without doubt, huge similarities between Islam and Christianity and Judaism. All of us have a fundamentally, I would say, a fundamentally monotheistic idea. If you were to ask any Jew or Christian or Muslim to rationally explain the existence of God, the arguments that we bring forward are mostly the same ones. Jews, Christians and Muslims also believe in angels. They believe that God has sent prophets, that God has sent to those prophets books and messengers. We believe that there is a life after death, a day of judgment, an eternal reward, paradise, and eternal punishment, hellfire. So there are many, many things that we share in common. Also, Muslim Jews and Christians believe in different degrees, but in the concept of free will, that human beings have been given the freedom to choose to believe and worship God or not. So these are very common things. But I'm not sure that those alone are the reasons. In fact, I don't think they are the main reasons. The main reason, I believe, is to do with morality. The main reasons, I believe, are to do with morality. What's that? Someone's computer? Very devout computer. Program 2. Yeah, the main reasons, I believe, are to do with morality. And this is an area which I believe people of faith, and I do believe particularly Muslim, Jews and Christians have, there is an area where not only should we cooperate, but I do believe we have to. Now I'm going to introduce a topic that I believe is really very hugely important. And perhaps it's going to sound really controversial as I introduce it. If we don't have a transcendental anchor for our morality, in reality we have no morality. Or at least we could say accurately, there is no such thing as objective morality. This is something very, very important. Because, to translate that simply, if we don't believe in God, and if we don't believe that God has revealed to us guidance through which and by which we should live, that God has defined for us what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is evil, then you have no objective viewpoint of what good and evil and right and wrong is. So the point is, therefore, that if one does not believe in God, if one is an atheist, presumably, if you don't believe in God, you're an atheist, right? The challenge here is, if you are an atheist, or if the society is a secular society, my question here is, what is the basis of their morality? What is the basis on which they make the decision, this is right and this is wrong and this is good and this is evil and we should do this and we shouldn't do that? Well, according to the theory of evolution, we are just animals. Maybe slightly sophisticated animals, but we're just animals. That's all we are. We're just a product like every other creature, just like the ants and the worms and the elephants and the trees and whatever. We're just a product of random mutation of DNA that has been chosen through natural selection. And therefore, we just do whatever it is that nature has decided or programmed for us to do. To give you an example in respect to animals, it's very obvious. When you see a lion attack a little gazelle and rip its throat open, you don't go, oh, what a wicked lion. That's just the lion doing what the lion does. When the male shark forces itself upon the female shark in order to copulate, yeah, if a man did that to a woman, we'd call it rape. And it would be considered to be a crime. However, that's just a shark doing what sharks do. Because they're animals. They just do what animals do. So therefore, in reality, if we are just animals, and we are just products of evolution and random mutation of DNA, morality in reality is an artificial construct. You can't really talk about human beings doing bad things when one group of human beings commits genocide on another, and we rape and we steal, and similarly when we love and we do so-called altruistic acts. In fact, really, these are just products of our evolution. We're just behaving how we have evolved to behave. That's what you have to believe. And if there is something we call morality, it's only a convenience for us. It's only something that is a construct that we use in order to survive and procreate and advance ourselves as a species. But that morality, of course, is always subject to change. It's always subject to change. Because as society changes, morality changes. So let me give you a thought experiment, therefore. If this is what society is going to believe and is going to teach, then in reality, how do you argue that genocide is actually really bad? How? I mean, hands up who thinks killing 6 million Jews is absolutely evil, it's objectively wrong, and it could never be right. Right? I mean, most of us, we agree with that, right? Not all, I notice. Most of us. Okay? Maybe some people just don't want to put their hands up. Okay? But I mean, most of us agree that that's an objectively wrong. But imagine if the Nazis took over the whole of the world. Well, they planned that, right? And so, therefore, the de facto government of the planet was fascism. And they, put all their propaganda machinery to convince everybody that eliminating Jews was really a hugely important thing. And we all accepted it because that's just the social norm. The reality is that although a lot of people would say, yes, it's wrong, in reality, a lot of those very self-same people would be participating in it, I am sure. Unless, of course, you have a transcendental anchor. Unless your morality is not something that is subject to the whims of society. That you have an idea of right and wrong that is outside yourself and outside ourselves as human beings. And that is where I believe Jews and Muslims and Christians have a very, very important common ground. And I think you find the Pope has spoken about it. Muslims don't have a representative to speak on that same level, but I certainly know it's an issue that Muslims are discussing a lot. This whole idea that morality is something that is transient, that can change from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. Whatever society happens to decide is moral and acceptable, well, we should go with the flow. The church should just get real and move with the times. I remember, back in the 1970s, I don't know, but, it was very strange to see that people were hemorrhaging from the church. Hemorrhaging. People were just, churches were empty, and they were so desperate to get people to come to the church, they started having discos in the church. This was in the days of John Travolta, disco and all that type of stuff. And I even remember feeling very uncomfortable with that. Although I was a very fond of disco dancing. I don't do it anymore. I was a very good dancer as well. You can take it from my dad. My dad said, it's such a shame actually he doesn't dance anymore. Such a wonderful dancer, he used to say. But I used to find it, really strange that, why? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to lower, I'm sorry, and that's what I mean it, you don't want to lower yourself to that level. People of faith have to stand for their principles. Because their principles are not the ones they have invented themselves. We didn't write the Ten Commandments. We didn't write the Quran. We didn't write the Beatitudes. Those are things that have come from God. That is guidance that has come from the Creator. So the meek are always blessed, and the peacemakers are always blessed, right? Even if you are a gangster in the street and you want respect, right? Yeah, and you have to shoot someone to get it. No, blessed are the meek, right? And that the things that God has made unlawful, No one has the right to make them lawful. This is an affront to God. It is as if we are saying, we know better than, yes, God, whatever, yes, but you said that a long time ago. Right? Well, do we know better than God? But this is, you see, in Islam, this is shirk. That a person can claim that they could legislate in opposition to what God has legislated. That they can make lawful what God has made unlawful. And they can make unlawful what God has made lawful. Actually, this is something the Quran chastised the Jews and the Christians for. In the Quran, Allah said that the Jews and Christians took their priests and their rabbis as gods besides Allah. And there was one companion who used to be a Christian. He said, "O Messenger of God, we didn't used to worship them." Now he was thinking in his mind, we didn't used to prostrate before them and take them as a direction of prayer, and we didn't used to pray to them. He had this idea, and the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Didn't they make lawful for you what God had made unlawful, and you accepted it? And didn't they make unlawful for you what God had made lawful, and you accepted it?" He said, "Yes, we did that." He said, "That was your worship of them." And of course I would say that Muslims are doing exactly the same things today. These things are not in the Quran. The stories of the Quran about the people who came before us are not there so we can call people bad names. No. They're there so we should learn the lesson, and we shouldn't fall into the same mistakes that people made before us. Although it is almost inevitable that we will do that. But this is what I go back to about unity in faith. I believe that Muslims, Jews and Christians especially, but actually you'll find most religions generally, but Muslims, Jews and Christians especially, share a very, very common idea of moral values. Our moral values are very, very similar. Yes, it may be that in Islam we have more of an emphasis on certain things, and Judaism may have, Islam may be more of an emphasis on, ritual and prayer and being precise in that. Okay? Similarly, I suppose Judaism, Christianity has more of an emphasis on love and compassion and mercy, although it is certainly not absent from Islam. Of course, every single chapter of the Quran, except one, begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the mercy-giving. Mercy is certainly an important part and component of our religion. However, it's this issue of morality. And actually, I believe in an increasingly secularized and secularizing society, the relevance of the morals and the values that are the morals and values that have been revealed by the Creator for the benefit of humanity. Because God does not need us to worship Him. God does not need us to follow His laws. God does not need us to follow His guidance, because God is self-sufficient. He is free of all wants and needs. No, this guidance has been given to us from God's knowledge, from His wisdom. He created us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And it is His mercy that He has guided us according to this knowledge. And this is the common ground. And this is the strongest common ground. And this is also interesting, that I go back to my former point. Why in the Islamic law, Jews and Christians almost have a completely independent judiciary system in an Islamic lands that are governed according to Islamic law. Churches judge their people by their ecclesiastical law. And there are some general laws that apply to all people, but basically, churches, rabbis, synagogues, they have full access to implement their own laws on their own people. In fact, they are obliged to do that. In fact, someone was telling me, and I've never actually heard this before, that Umar ibn al-Khattab, who was the second ruler of the Muslims, he actually appointed someone to go and check that the Christians and Jews were applying their laws properly upon their people. It's part of his... and it's interesting, of course, when we're often reminded how we live in a very tolerant society. And that aren't we so lucky to be able to live in England and practice our faith. But of course, from the point of view of Muslims, in our history, Jews and Christians have generally been much more free to practice their faith in a much more complete sense than Muslims are. I mean, look at what happened look at the furore that came when the Archbishop of Canterbury, said it was inevitable that some aspects of Sharia law were going to have to be included in British law. And what an uproar there was about that, just the sheer notion of it. From a so-called tolerant society. And of course I don't dismiss that. It is tolerant to a degree. But that's not my... Well, I suppose it is my beef. I have a beef with secularism. I don't agree with secularism. I think secularism is very dangerous. Its ultimate path is a self-destructive path. Because a society without morals, a society without objective moral values, inevitably must ultimately go down the path, and this is what you will find inevitably happens, of just merely following desires. Whatever the majority of people feel like doing and what they desire is what they are going to push forward.